0700 hours on Sunday morning and the hangar doors roll open. Hello, I'm John Hayden, and for the next 75 minutes, share with me selected highlights of the 1987 Warbirds Association Air Pageant, held in early January 1987 at Ardmore Airfield, located some 20 miles south of Auckland City. The New Zealand Warbirds Association, founded in 1979, is a group of individuals who are interested in military aeroplanes. Membership is open to all persons with a genuine interest in restoring, maintaining and flying old military aircraft.
Well, you may not have as many Tigers as you originally thought.
On the days before the pageant, large numbers of Warbird members and associated groups helped to set up and plan for their first air show.
Okay.
Oh, we've got room down here for that. Yeah.
Willing helpers attend to the many tasks required for the big event.
Camera now, you better look intelligent.
No, it's we're going to avoid that. We'll start down the other end. We've got some...
Former RNZAF Corsair pilot and well-known aviation personality Brian Cox explains Ardmore's first use.
Yeah, the airfield was originally constructed in 1942, intended to be a hospital for the American Armed Forces to accommodate wounded from the Solomons. However, with the reversal suffered by the Japanese, Ardmore was never used by the Americans, so it was handed over to the RNZAF, who used it as a fighter operational training unit. However, with the introduction of the Corsairs, the operational training units using P-40s were both shifted to a Harker, and Ardmore thereafter was used for converting Corsair pilots and preparing Corsair squadrons for service up in the Solomons. Of those three hangars there, the nearest one is Warbirds hangar, but during the wartime that hangar was not used for maintenance of aircraft, but was in fact our clothing and equipment store.
A briefing for all participating pilots was held in the old wartime hangar occupied by Warbirds.
The grass vector has been widened from what it previously is. The red line along here denotes the crowd line. Runs right around here. There will also be a taxi-back lane over here. The aircraft will be parked in this area over here. Up until about here will be active aircraft in the display. The yellow area up here will be static aircraft. And the area up here is a truck park. Over here is the helicopter active area. We'll be joyriding out of this area, departing out on this line, out over here and returning on the other.
The weather of the last few days has given me a lot of cause for anxious moments, but the help and enthusiasm that many of the other members of the club and the dedication of chaps like John Denton in charge of all the flying, and BJ Rhodes and Bill Howell and many others. Well, I think I've done a lot of work. Those guys have also done a lot of work, and between us I think we're going to have an excellent show.
Vintage car clubs provided a small collection of restored cars as static displays. The Limp Blimp. A large representation of the trucking industry also provided some of their fleet vehicles for display. The planning and organisation for the air show took many months of negotiation and effort on the part of Warbird members. Display Flight Coordinator BJ Rhodes explains.
Well, we started something like 12 months ago, I guess, and John Denton and myself had the job of putting together the flying program, and there was a lot of midnight oil burnt, I guess, in putting it together. We wrote to a lot of people all over New Zealand and invited them to attend. We put together what we believe to be a very interesting and representative program of the Warbirds movement in New Zealand. We've got a very comprehensive program. We've incorporated every aspect of New Zealand aviation, from home-built, light aircraft, ag aviation, warbirds, light aircraft, air racing. It's a lot of work. We put a lot of effort into it, and I believe everybody is going to certainly have a most enjoyable air show.
Two McDonnell Skyhawks were the first to appear, breaking off and landing. First to land was a TA-4K dual-seated trainer, followed by the single-seat A-4K version. This Skyhawk is painted in a striking gold, red, white and blue livery to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the RNZAF. The second Skyhawk is in the low visibility camouflage colours of No. 2 Squadron from Ohakea Air Base.
These three Tiger Moths have taken off in formation to commence a tail chase. First Tiger going into a wing over now, the others following. The spacing is not critical in these manoeuvres. We try to fill the sky up with aircraft. These two Tiger Moths are crossed up in level flight, basically side-slipping in straight and level. The Tiger Moth coming into land is slipping off height. It is a maneuver that is used to let down over trees or any obstruction. It is now landing on one wheel. It is held in this position for the total length of the run out. This Tiger is spinning. It's a good aircraft to spin, does a classic spin. It's a fairly high rate of rotation, and the aircraft in the rotation pitches nose up, nose down as it is rotating. The Tiger Moth approaching airfield now is setting himself up for crazy flying. It's a misuse of the controls or overuse, and it's purely for demonstrating purposes. It gives an idea of the controllability of the aircraft at low speed. The Tiger has bounced off the ground. All these maneuvers are done at fairly slow speed, and there's very coarse use of the controls needed.
Affectionately named Uglies, flying boxcars and Bristol vibrators, these B-170 Bristol Freighters bring back many memories. Two 2,000 horsepower Bristol Hercules engines propel these machines into the air. These aircraft saw active service with the RNZAF from 1957 to 1977, when they were retired and disposed of. Many were bought privately, some to fly again, others were ratted for spares and left derelict. At Ardmore, only 2 remain in flying condition. One of which was used to drop some 60-plus sky jumpers. Experienced parachutists with more than 800 jumps each attempted a large link-up, leaving the B-170 at 10,000 feet. The attempt was not quite achieved, but gave the spectators a good display of free fall and modern parachute handling. The Bristol freighter that dropped the skydivers returns to land. A 30-year-plus aircraft giving a good performance. Several Pitts Special home-builts take off in formation for their display. Trillo, an experienced aerobatic pilot, performs a slow roll. Then climbs for height and to gain speed for 2 snap rolls, followed by a brilliant display of world-class aerobatics. A New Zealand-built Fletcher top-dressing aircraft from James Aviation displays the machine rigged for aerial spraying. These Fletchers from Whanganui Aero Work make a formation entrance, pulling up and breaking off to go in 3 different directions. They return straight down the runway towards each other. At the crossing point, they pull up sharply, dumping the remainder of their load of fertilizer with spectacular effect. Here, a single Fletcher demonstrates why it's such a good ag aircraft, putting fertilizer in 2 parallel strips, only 20 feet above the ground. A Squirrel helicopter piloted by Tony Monk shows the versatility of the machine by flying in all directions. Ending his display with a high-speed torque turn. The closest a helicopter comes to looping. An American Bell Jet Ranger passes, equipped with spraying gear. Now, here's an unusual use for a Hughes 300 helicopter. Peter Bell does some hanging around from the bottom of a ladder. Look, Mum, no hands. Another squirrel is equipped for firefighting with a monsoon bucket. The squirrels are a relatively new addition to New Zealand helicopter fleets and are a good example of the French aerospace industry.
It's a Piper L4B. They were built especially, I think, for the Army Air Force, the American Army Air Force, and used for reconnaissance, spotting, things like that, taking generals and colonels around, you know. It was like a flying motorbike in a way. They were utilised in many ways. There was one chap called Ryan, an American, who decided to try and fit a rocket onto the struts on the plane. And before the war had ended, he was actually carrying 4 rockets, 2 on each side. And he has been known that apparently he'd got 5 Tiger tanks and a personnel carrier. There was 1 or 2 of them tried it and they actually blew their wings off. A little bit of embarrassment.
The chief flying instructor of the Auckland Gliding Club, Arthur Gatland, displays his Schemperth discus glider. He currently commands Air New Zealand Friendships and has also flown Harriers. Highlight of the air show, and very popular with the crowd, was the North American P-51D Mustang. We talked to the pilot, Trevor Bland.
Like any World War II fighter, they require a lot of maintenance. It's an ongoing thing all the time. For each hour that you fly the aeroplane, you probably spend several days just doing little bits and pieces of maintenance. Nothing major, but little titivating here and there, and keeping the aircraft in pristine condition for display. It's very hard to keep an aircraft like this in pristine condition because the Merlin throws out a lot of oil and various parts of the aircraft get pretty dirty, and you know, this detracts from the appearance of the aircraft as far as the public is concerned. So we spend a lot of time just keeping the aircraft clean and keeping all the Jubilee clips done up. You know, with the amount of vibration there, they tend to loosen off after each flight, and you get coolant leaks, oil leaks, which doesn't enhance the pristine appearance of the airplane. We like to keep it in that condition. The Mustang that we have here is done up in 3 Territorial Air Force Squadron colours. The aircraft was actually imported from the United States 2 years ago. It's powered by a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine built by Packard under licence in the States. Horsepower's 1,490. It has a 2-stage supercharger, but still plenty of power. It pulls 3,000 RPM at 61 inches of boost, which gives it a lot of grunt on takeoff. Top speed is redlined at 435 knots or 505 miles an hour, and in the high-speed runs I normally try to achieve 400 knots minimum on that first pass past the crowd, and somewhere between 50 and 100 feet. Now this takes me to about 5,000 feet on the initial upward rolls on the aircraft, and from there on I just move into the sequence with the display. You're playing with the power all the time on the Mustang because there's so much boost available to you It's very easy to have too much speed for the particular manoeuvres that you might want to do. So for each manoeuvre you're either increasing power or decreasing power. The RPM stay at 3000, so you don't notice it too much from the ground. The sequence takes about 4 or 5 minutes. I've always worked on the policy that if you spend too long in front of the crowd, they tend to become bored. And you need a cloud base of somewhere around 4,000 feet to complete the full display. The aircraft's an incredibly docile aeroplane for its vintage and power. It has a large 4-bladed propeller on the front there. As soon as you take the power off the aircraft, it slows down relatively quickly. And you get a distinctive popping noise from the exhausts when the engine is back at idle. And in the circuit, we're looking for about 150 knots in the pattern, and across the fence at 100 knots, which is about 115 miles an hour.
This vintage 1943 DC-3, one of some 49 ex-RNZAF, is used for aerial top dressing. On this run, Bruce has shut down and feathered his right-hand engine to demonstrate its single-engine handling. Note the large amount of rudder to maintain directional control. Bruce Thompson, a 17,000-hour DC-3 pilot from Gisborne, throws this large aircraft around the sky like a light aircraft. The DC-3 is capable of carrying 5 tons of fertilizer. Unfortunately, a downturn in the industry has forced her retirement from agricultural work. While waiting for the DC-3 to return, a collection of aircraft representing famous World War I fighters take to the air. 2 replica SE-5As, 3 7/10 scale Hawker Furies, and a full-size replica of the Red Baron's Fokker triplane. The DC-3 returns, landing with noticeable crosswind correction. Heavy rain clouds had hovered around all day, but it had stayed fine until now. A fairly heavy rain shower passes, and although people's spirits were dampened, the air show continued. SE-5A and the Fokker triplane stage a mock dogfight behind their modern counterpart. The Red Baron succeeds by shooting down the SE-5A, ending his display in a victory roll. Two Scale Hawker Fury support fighters return and land. Wing walkers are required, as these aircraft don't have brakes and cannot maneuver well in tight spaces. A rare lineup of World War I fighters, all locally built replicas. Stuart Tantrum, pilot and builder of the SE-5A, looks tired after a 2-hour flight from New Plymouth in the rain.
The aircraft is powered by a Continental W670 220 horsepower radial. It's the largest size that is permitted to be installed in a home-built aircraft in New Zealand, and it's also a little bit more powerful than the original aeroplane, which had a 110 horsepower motor. So we've got about twice as much power as von Richthofen had when he was flying it. The aircraft is absolutely authentic. It's a full-size reproduction of the Fokker DR1 triplane. The colour scheme is taken from the standard German pre-printed fabric, camouflage fabric. It's called lozenge camouflage, as you can see, for obvious reason. The patterns are shaped like lozenges. This pattern is hand-painted. There are 18 patterns in 5 different colours, so it took us a while. And then the aircraft is finished with the standard black crosses of the German Air Corps and the red markings, nose and tail, of von Richthofen's Jagdgeschwader 2.
The RNZAF's current frontline fighter goes through its paces before the crowd. Some 22 of these aircraft are presently in service. A Pratt & Whitney J52P8A jet engine of 9,300 pounds thrust propels the McDonnell Douglas Skyhawk to a maximum speed of 675 miles per hour. With external fuel tanks, it has a range of 2,000 miles. And 8,200 pound combat load of various stores can be carried aloft. The RNZAF purchased the initial 14 Skyhawks in 1970, and in 1984 bought another 10 from the Australian Air Force. In 1986, all Skyhawks were updated to give them more modern fighter capability. A large collection of restored Tiger Moths race together around a rectangular circuit in a quest to be winners. Tiger owner and pilot Tony Renoff comments on the race.
The Tiger Moths are taking off for the air race, which involves 6 aircraft. are airborne now. They're racing right from the very start. The race is taking place within the perimeter of Ardmore Airfield. These aircraft have very similar speeds. The only advantage you can get is a coarse prop against a fine prop, the way the aircraft is rigged, and a certain amount of pilot skill. Flying in an air race does not create a great deal of problems. You do try to keep out of the slipstream of the lead aircraft. And when you make a turn, you try to do this turn very accurately so there is no slipping. The aircraft in this race have done this one circuit, which is the maximum required, and they're about to land.
This vintage 220 horsepower, 9-cylinder radial engine Stearman trainer is owned by Len and Wendy Cowper.
This aircraft, particular aircraft, was one of 9,575 that were built during World War II. It's the American US version of the Tiger Moth, and it was used as the basic trainer for the Army, Navy and Air Corps during World War II. And this particular one was one of 25 that were given to the Philippine Air Force at the end of World War II to rebuild their Air Force. And they had them for they flew them for about 10 years, declared them surplus. So I bought it in Manila, took it apart, took it to Hong Kong, rebuilt it, kept it there for 12 years. So although the basic airframe was built in 1943, it was all completely rebuilt in the 1970s. In 1982, we brought it down here and rebuilt it here, which is magnificent. You know, flying around New Zealand, it's just made for this type of flying. You don't have to be crazy to own one of these things, but if you are, it helps.
As this aircraft had not flown for 2 years, it took some starting. Here we see the inertial starting system being hand cranked. Another volunteer lends a hand. Another victim finds the going tough. Len returns with a little mechanical help. And triumphs with an electric starter. Inhibiting oil, used to protect the engine during storage, is burnt and forced out of the cylinders. This Bantam is a New Zealand designed and built microlight powered by an Austrian Rotax 503 50 horsepower two-stroke engine. The Pitts Special was the first competition aerobatic craft in kit form and can be fitted with engines up to 180 horsepower. The first design flew in 1944 and it's been produced ever since. Terrain turbulence are powered by Volkswagen car engines up to 1600 cc's and have a range of 300 miles. The Longies was designed by Dick Rutan in 1978 and first flew in 1979. It's powered by a 115 horsepower engine and with exceptional fuel efficiency has a range of 1,430 miles. Here's a collection of home-built aircraft. They come in many designs. The Evans Volksplane, a Cavalier SA-102. The Turbulent, the Corby Starlet, and the Longies. Its radical low-drag design has forward elevators and canard wings. Designer Dick Rutan made world headlines when he flew another of his designs, Voyager, around the world non-stop.
This is actually Cynthia's second solo. She did her first solo many years ago in a Cherokee, but as a result of that abortive attempt, she's had difficulty ever since in finding another instructor to fly with her or anyone to give her an aircraft. On this flight, she actually hadn't recovered from the hangover from the previous night's session, and she also forgot to check the fuel, so any moment now I think the engine will probably give up the ghost. So it looks like, there it is now. So it looks as though Cynthia's second solo is also going to finish up as her first forced landing. And she normally has a wee problem in finding the ground. Ah, there it is. And she's lost it again. Anyway, any moment now, there she is back on the ground, and she always has a problem in maintaining direction after landings. It usually gets away from it about this stage. Most of her landings finish up as a bit of a ground loop, and I expect that any time now her instructor will come out to congratulate her. Although I think if you watch carefully, she'll probably get more of a beating up than congratulations.
One of the lighter moments of the day was a stunt pulled on the large and unsuspecting crowd. They were led to believe that this car was blocking an entrance. After numerous requests to the fictitious driver, the crowd were amazed to see it relocated in this unusual manner.
This air race that was held was the first of its type in New Zealand. First, certainly for the Harvards. I don't recall any other races, air races, being held within the last 20 years anyway, and so it was a first, and it was very successful. The race, as you can see, was based on a circuit of turning points fairly close to the aerodrome, and on this run over the field, the Harvards dived down, then they pulled up around to the right and then downwind again, and all of them trying to, of course, take the lead, and having to obey fairly strict rules too, because it can be quite dangerous if people get carried away. So there's certain rules about overtaking and so on. But basically everyone was going flat out to try and get there first, and really it boiled down to a skill of the pilot, but there are other factors as well, like the engine to some extent. Some of them were done a few more hours than others and didn't quite have the power output. Propeller likewise. But also things like or in particular, the paint job on the aeroplane. If they got a nice smooth finish, you can imagine that would give it a nice easy passage through the air, and as it turned out, that 165 was the actual winner, and it had only just gone into the air the day before and had an immaculate paint job, so I'm sure that the paint was a factor there as well.
What's it like flying a Harvard? Air New Zealand pilot Ken Walker, who flew 78 in the air race, explains.
The aeroplane itself is quite a leveler. It's a very pilot-orientated airplane. I guess Americans designed this thing, the Harvard, and did a good job, because it'll level anybody. It's a very, very nice airplane to fly, if you know, but it's not an easy airplane to fly.
Meanwhile, private pilot John Greenstreet, flying WAR, explains his feelings about the Harvard.
I guess like all male chauvinist pigs. I do. I get a great sense of achievement and satisfaction out of flying the Harvard reasonably well, because it is a difficult airplane to fly well. It's an airplane which anyone can fly averagely. You're flying the airplane at a couple of parts of its envelope. One is at very high speed and very high G loading in the turns. And for me, as a relatively low time private pilot, it's a very interesting experience. And I find it fascinating to fly with other guys like Ken and with Bruce and the other guys who are relatively high time pilots. And to a degree, not complete, but to a degree to foot it with them.
This immaculately restored Tiger Moth is the proud possession of airshow organizer John Crosby. He explains with Cliff Bellinger's help the arduous task of restoring and rebuilding vintage aircraft.
I bought a project off a chap that had spent 5 years gathering bits from all over New Zealand, in fact all over England, Australia. A young apprentice engineer with Air New Zealand and Tiger enthusiast had gathered all these parts together and had partially restored some of them. Then he decided that he wanted to build a helicopter. So I bought all these parts off him, and I gave the whole lot to Cliff here, who assembled it and finished it and virtually built the airplane.
That's a...
Cliff explains the Gypsy Major engine.
Different to a car engine, as much that the motor is effectively upside down. The cylinder heads are at the bottom. There's a dry sump engine, consequently, and the oil tank's on the far side, so the oil splashes around the crankshaft and drains back via these pipes to the oil tank. Carburetor, normal downdraft through to your cylinder heads. It's a 4-cylinder engine. It's 5.1 to 1 compression ratio, and it only develops 130 horsepower at 2400 revs maximum. And in a cruise, you're only getting about 1900 revs, which would give you 100 odd horsepower on the mark. It's 6,200 cc's, if you like to look at it in its cc size, to give you an idea compared to your modern car, which might be 1,500 cc's. Modern car might have 100 horsepower for 1,500. So it gives you a bit of an idea. The low compression really keeps it down. As a consequence, it lasts a long-lasting motor because low pressure and it turns slowly. A good, reliable old motor.
Several Tiger pilots kept the crowd amused by mock-bombing a moving target. de Havilland DHC-2 Beaver, powered by a 450 horsepower Pratt & Whitney Junior Wasp engine and flown by Ian Reynolds. The instrumentation on this aircraft has been left fairly original. The purpose of this flight was to advertise the air show. Over Auckland City, we were passed by the Harvard display team. Back at Ardmore, Ian aptly displayed the Beaver's ability to fly in tight spaces. For this reason, most Beavers in New Zealand were used for top dressing. The Beaver is painted in the livery of the one used in the Commonwealth Transantarctic Expedition in 1956. Ian completes his display with a well-executed wheeler landing. This BAE 125-800 series is the first corporate jet of its type to be registered in New Zealand and is based at Ardmore. Two Garrett 7315 turbofans giving 4,300 pounds of static thrust. This aircraft features some of the world's most advanced computerized flight control systems and is luxuriously appointed for today's busy executive. It will cruise Auckland to Wellington in 55 minutes with a range of up to 3,000 miles.
Enough to have 7 Harvards at the air show there. 2 of them were just really out of the workshop, all privately owned. They're all ex-Air Force machines, these Harvards. The Air Force used them for over 35 years for training, but we had one with a bad propeller problem which took quite a bit of sorting out and sending the propeller away for servicing and back again, and the other one was just out of the paint shop. This chap's using a strobe light to check the propeller on this new fit that's just been done. It's got a single radial engine, puts out about 600 horsepower, though it's derated to 550, mainly in consideration of prolonged aircraft life. It's got a variable pitch propeller. The Harvard actually was built by North American, which is the same company which later went on to build the Mustang and the Sabre. But these Harvards were built in early 1940s, and they were a training aircraft during the war, and the Royal New Zealand Air Force used them for many years as a pilot trainer. The aerobatic team that we had on the day, it was the first time we'd we'd really got organised to do a sequence of manoeuvres, and we called ourselves the Roaring Forties. It was reflecting somewhat the pilot's age, but also, as I said, the aircraft were built in the 40s, and they do make a very distinctive sound, so we thought the Roaring Forties was quite a suitable name for them. So we had a four-man team, which basically we operated as some of the runs were in four, and we did an initial run with three other Harvards, so we made quite a noise with a 7 aircraft flyover, and then we split up into the team of basically 3 doing formation aerobatics and 1 solo man. The pilots in the aerobatic team were all ex-Air Force pilots, all trained by the Air Force, and in fact all flew the Harvards in the when the Air Force used Harvards in their Red Checkers aerobatic team, which, although they use air trainers now, originally used Harvards, and our 4 people were all members of that team. Number 2 was Keith Skilling, number 3 is John Lamont, and the 4th man, the man in what we call the box, he's got the smoke going, he's the solo man, that's John Denton, and shortly he will break off and carry out coordinated aerobatics with the rest of the team. There's John Denton doing the avalanche manoeuvre, well named, with the smoke running, and the other aircraft have broken off, and he goes into a solo routine in front of the crowd now. It really chews through the gas, about 35 gallons an hour during an aerobatic routine. Here's John doing a stall turn to the left. The Harvard was one of the first all-metal aeroplanes to come out of the war. A lot of those predecessors had canvas and wood and so on, but this, although it's got canvas control surfaces, it's basically an all-metal machine. Nice loop there by John Denton. Here's a slow roll, and unfortunately the engine always cuts out when the aircraft runs inverted, and you can see lots of smoke and flames there, and there's the engine picking up again now. The 3 doing their bit. This is a barrel roll in line astern. After which the aircraft pitch up individually and then they carry out a low run. The final formation manoeuvre that we did was a loop and Vic. The Vic is like the original box but with the solo man missing. As you can see, the wingmen, their aim is really to try and stay in position on the leader, and this is how it should really look. And assuming there isn't too much turbulence, then we try and maintain this position throughout, and we break from that formation and carry out individual low runs in front of the crowd, and that really completes our routine. We haven't all got smoke fitted yet, but it obviously makes it a bit more spectacular.
This is entering the snap roll at 80 knots, out of which I go into a Cuban 8, which entails diving normally to 130, but being a bit low, I went into this one at 120, so squashed over the top a bit. We dive down to 45 degrees, then roll out, dive the other way, pulling up into another loop, over the top, below the horizon, rolling back and diving to gain speed for an avalanche, which is basically a snap roll, an upward snap roll, falling out of which pull the mixture and stop the prop. I'm going now into a barrel roll dead stick, diving to about 115 to get round, At this stage, I always have to remember that being dead stick, the glide capability is much better than with a windmilling prop, so one has to be careful not to be too close in. You'll notice I don't use flap at this stage because it's much safer to use side slip for adjusting the height rather than applying flap and then possibly getting stuck too low with flap on. One benefit of being flapless is, and less drag, the aircraft tends to glide quite a distance, enabling one to make various manoeuvres such as these and not come to a stop too quickly. In fact, I usually try and finish up in the right spot without having to use the engine at all. Also saves gas.
Vintage aircraft displayed were Oster J5 and Piper L4B, and a lineup of de Havilland aircraft. The Domini in NAC colours, a Devon which is still flying passengers, and the Beaver. A historical flypast displayed the aircraft in age order. The SE-5A, representing the pre-20s. The Hawker Fury. The Tiger Moth. And the Piper Cub, from the 20s to the 40s. Then a Domini. A Devon. A Chipmunk. A Stearman. A Crumb and Goose. And a Beaver, representing aircraft from 1945 to the 60s. The Royal Australian Air Force were present in the form of a de Havilland DHC-4 Caribou aircraft. They first flew in Canada in 1958 and were designed as a twin-engined all-weather short takeoff and landing tactical transport aircraft. Two 1,450 horsepower Pratt & Whitney give it plenty of power to lift heavy loads, up to 8,740 pounds, and it has a range of 1,300 miles at 216 miles an hour. A very large tail makes it yaw without difficulty. You can even travel backwards on the ground, thanks to reverse pitch propellers, giving them room to take off again from short strips. The prototype DHC Caribou first flew in 1958 and was given to the US Army for evaluation in 1959, resulting in an order for for 159 aircraft to be built. At least 16 other countries, including Australia, purchased Caribous to fly with their air forces or as passenger aircraft. An event that was very popular in the 1930s as part of early barnstorming days was the wing walking act. Here, Rusty Butterworth explains the sensation of wing walking.
Before I went up, I was a little bit nervous, but I had great faith in the pilot, and the stand had been tested and no problems, and I wasn't really scared of doing it. I was just a little bit nervy just prior to going up, but oh well, here goes, I'm doing it, and got up there and didn't feel too bad at all, really. I didn't sort of get the feel I was going very fast. I just felt like I was on a motorbike virtually. That's sort of really how I felt, being on a motorbike doing about 70 miles an hour. I felt good up there, didn't feel scared. I had a good view all around the airfield and waved to the crowd below, they're all watching, and no, it was really good. I really enjoyed it. I'd do it again tomorrow.
Then the heavens opened up. The Skyhawk taxis out in the wet, and people scatter. The Skyhawk returns because it was considered unsafe for it to carry on with its display. The BEA 125 becomes a jet boat. A Piper Warrior tries water skiing. It may have been damp underfoot, but spirits were high, as summed up by flight coordinator B.J. Rhodes.
We have got through all the display with the exception of 2, possibly 3 displays at this point. And I think that we're very lucky to, with the weather conditions, to get through it as we have done.
And so ended another air show, concluding successfully despite the inclement weather. The Warbirds Association of New Zealand plan to have similar air shows throughout the country in the future, featuring more of these classic and vintage aircraft. If you're interested in joining New Zealand Warbirds Association, write to Box 73063 Auckland, or call at the Warbirds hangar, Ardmore Airfield, on Sundays.